Hello and happy Revenge of the Fifth. My name's Brittany, and I'm here with Brian Herring, who is the puppeteer behind some of our favorite characters, including BB-8 and the Porgs and a bunch of others I'm sure he's going to tell us all about. So Brian, thank you so much for celebrating Star Wars with us.
Thank you very much for having me. There's so much to celebrate. It's been I've
Yes.
really enjoyed May the 4th and Revenge of the 5th. It always makes me laugh.
Did you have some good celebrations yesterday for May the 4th?
Yeah, we did a few bits and pieces. And also, I like seeing all the stuff that goes up on Twitter and Facebook with people doing cosplays and just genuine sort of just fan interactions and just things people enjoy. So it's I did a thing on Twitter yesterday where I put a picture of myself as a 7-year-old, as a Star Wars fan in my Star Wars t-shirt, and I just got people to send me photographs of themselves in their earliest sort of fandom stages, which were quite funny.
Is that how old you were when you first got into Star Wars?
Yeah, 77. It was I was 7 years old, so my dad took me to see it, and it absolutely blew me away, me and my brother, and the world was never quite the same after that.
Do you remember like seeing it for the first time when you were that young?
I remember lining up, and I kind of remember seeing it. I do know I've been told I slept through the last 10 minutes, but I just was bouncing off the walls when I got home. And then, of course, the toys came out and everything else started from there. So that kind of really built my enthusiasm towards the whole thing. And I just stayed with it. I mean, it kind of waned off, I suppose, when I was about 13, 14. And then the prequels came back out. I was always into it, but the prequels came back out, and we just came through. And then I went to work on them, and I suddenly realized that I had all this information in my head that had previously only been useful for kind of trivia quizzes and repelling women. And I was our department's sort of Star Wars expert for a while. It was great.
What is that like as a fan of Star Wars being in a Star Wars movie?
It's really odd to do because we never thought that it was going to come back after they made the prequels. That we just figured that was going to be it. So I almost worked on the Phantom Menace because I shot that in London, and I was puppeteering at the time. And a friend was working on it, and he said he'd try and get me on it, but that just didn't end up happening. So we just sort of thought, well, we're not going to do that. And then they came back. And I was given a job by a gentleman called Neil Scanlon, who I'd worked for before, who was the head of the Creature Shop on Star Wars and continues to be so. He'd won an Oscar for a film called Babe some years before. He used to work for the Jim Henson Company. And he brought me on board as a puppeteer consultant. So I was helping to cast the performers and work out ways with the fabrication and the animatronics department, the design department, on how to put people into sort of crazy aliens. And so we just carried on into this sort of Star Wars world. And I remember working. We were out in the desert, and I was with Dave Chapman, who's the other puppeteer for BB-8, and we were standing in the desert. And I said to him, "If I wake up and this has been a dream, I should be really angry for ages." And it is a very, very strange thing to be a part of, especially to come into the sequel trilogy where you had Han Solo and Chewbacca and Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker and the Millennium Falcon, because that was very much my Star Wars I grew up on. So to go along and be a part of that was really quite special.
Right, you're like filming on the Millennium Falcon. I'm sure you're like,
it's great. It is absolutely crazy. That set, if you ever get to chat to Kevin Smith, he'll tell you that it's a set that will make a grown man cry. Because he went on it and just burst into tears. You would see people get really emotional just walking in there because it's a whole environment. It's very cool.
I'm sure. So let's go back to the beginning. How did you become a puppeteer? Is it something you studied or knew about, or is it just something that kind of came to you?
My story is not particularly inspiring, really. I actually lied at an audition for a TV show. I'd met somebody and in a pub. Actually, my parents ran a pub in the country in England for years, and I got talking to this guy, and he worked on a TV show in the UK. He said they were having kind of a workshop, and I turned up to this thing. Turned out it was auditions. They said, "Had you done any puppets before?" And I told them I'd worked on a tour of Little Shop of Horrors, which I had because I moved scenery on it. It came through our local theatre as part of his tour, and they said, "Oh, it's very different to that," and they showed me what to do. And they were looking for assistant puppeteers, and they took me on. And 6 weeks later, I was on television, and that was in 1992. And I haven't really looked back since. I keep thinking I'm going to get found out, but They haven't yet, so that's okay. So yeah, so I grew up on the Muppets and that kind of thing, and the Dark Crystal and all those kind of those shows that were being made then. But I never thought it was something I was really interested in until I suddenly started doing it. Dave Chapman, who's to say the co-puppeteer for BB-8, he has a completely different story, and it's very much Jim Henson driven. So we've come from very different ends of it, and we've wound up in the middle. So it's been quite interesting.
It's always so interesting seeing where people come from, because there's so many different directions to come to, so many different paths you didn't even know were possible. Like becoming a puppeteer for Star Wars.
Exactly. Or puppeteer for anything. It's really strange. So I sort of did a lot of stuff on children's television and that kind of thing. And you think, oh, well, that's what puppeteers do. That you don't necessarily immediately assume that they work in big films, but actually there's a lot more of that sort of thing going on than you would think. Even puppetry performances that you don't necessarily see, because sometimes we get called in to wear our natty green suits and do reference performances for creatures, or for just characters that aren't ever going to be there. They're going to be realized digitally later. But to give the actors something to work off of, or to pick up, or to generally interact with, a lot of the times puppeteers will be employed to go in and do that.
It's so interesting. Is there an example that you have of something you did like that for Star Wars?
For Star Wars, some reference stuff we did for Star Wars. The thing was with Star Wars, it was mostly practical work. So nearly everything you see has been done. It's been realized there and then. One of the things I think was a lot of reference work was done for in The Force Awakens was Maz Kanata, the character that Lupita Nyong'o provided the voice performance for, and she also, along with another lady called Artie, they would be on set in grey suits with motion capture dots, but then they would shoot empty plates, so that the actors again had something to work off of. I've worked on I did the Robert Downey Doolittle movie, so I did a lot of the dialogue and the parrot and a few other things for that. So I would have a parrot on the back of my hand, and that would sit there, and I would be able to rod the head, so I would give a vocal performance, which would then be later replaced by Emma Thompson. This was always going to be the case, so I didn't get bumped off. But also it would sit on Robert's arm, so it would be creeping around, so he could feel where it was, and he would see where the eyes were, so he could make eye contact with it. And then when we'd done a couple with that, we'd take it out, and so they would do empty plates with it as well. But he already had that muscle memory of what that scene was like to play with a practical thing, or a physical thing there, and that lifts the level of the performance for the actors.
Now, do you get to have any input on what the puppets themselves look like, or how they should move, because you have experience with those kind of things, or are you just there to help it kind of just move and how it should act?
It depends. Sometimes with The Force Awakens, I was brought in to help do exactly that. So we would sort of do tests, and we would do what they call garbage bag tests, where you make something up very roughly with sort of things stuffed into garbage bags and tied into sausages, and you'd make bits and pieces like that, and you make things very, very roughly. Or you make things out of polystyrene and just test things out to see if it would work in theory. I didn't have very much to do with the design of BB-8, because that had gone through the guys at Lucasfilm, and then it came over to our department, and Jake Lunt Davis took the designs that Christian Altsman had started, and he kind of made BB-8 look the way you see now. I think the only actual input I had to the look of BB-8 was he has a little orange ring around his head that his eye cuts into, and originally that eye was lower, and I knew that from a puppetry point of view, if something's as small as BB-8 is, he would be constantly looking up, so he'd always have to pull the head back. So I asked him just to raise the eye slightly, so that he would always be looking up as a resting position. So if he ever had to look up on camera, you could move the head and you would see it move up. So, and that was just the thing, that if you were to build something that small as a real droid, you wouldn't have it so its head was constantly back. So that was just a kind of a real world logic to it that would just help the character slightly.
Just a little thing that makes a big difference in such a beloved character, because you can have those emotions coming from it.
Yes, very much so. BB-8's very lucky in that respect, because we were given these beautiful puppets that were built by the creature department. Josh Lee, who's the chief engineer for it, Matt Denton, who does a lot of the he does all of the software programming for these things, and Giles Hannigan and a few other people. Matt also drives the free rolling animatronic versions. of BB-8, and they'd given us these beautifully designed things, and the difference, I think, the main difference between BB-8 and R2-D2 is, I mean, everybody loves R2-D2; he's fantastic, but R2 did a lot of his acting in the sound edit. So Kenny Baker would rock him backwards and forwards and turn his head and do all that sort of internal puppetry, and then Ben Burt would come along and add that amazing language that he created for R2. But if you were to put angry noises on that performance, it would be an angry joy. But if you just take those off and put happy ones, it would then be a happy joy. But it wouldn't make a great deal of difference to the physical performance. So with BB-8, you can slowly push his head forward, which makes him look sad, or you can bring his head back very quickly and it makes him look startled, or you can cock it to the side to make him, look quizzical. So you can get a lot more range of emotions by being able to move the head, because really R2 just looks left and right. And it's his voice that really tells you how he's feeling. But with BB-8, you have a sort of a vocabulary of movement that can tell you how he thinks.
It's a very physical performance for a droid.
Yes, I mean, it does go very fast as well, so it's quite a physical performance for me as well. Whenever we're using the Puppeteer version of BB-8, because there's lots of different versions of him. The whole team of us, we kind of each bring a different skill set to the performance of BB-8, because he's every tool in the box. He's very simple rod puppetry. He's also very sophisticated animatronics, and he is again a digital version as well. Which, when you take all of those different versions of him, that's how you make one character. So he can do all kinds of crazy things as well. So there's stuff where the digital people at ILM will take over. If he has to roll around the inside of the Millennium Falcon, we'll do that digitally. But they'll always run some film of a practical BB-8 in that set, so that the digital guys have something to use as a reference, if you will, so that they can see where the lights reflect, how the shadows affect BB-8, the look of him, and if he goes through and he hits a bump, what the head would do, that kind of thing. So they animate very much off of practical performances.
So how did you go about, you said you had a partner who worked with you on making BB-8 and all his movements and putting everything together. How do you go about, starting that process at first, like the very first time when you had to play as BB-8 for The Force Awakens? How do you even start?
What we did, we spent quite a long time. First of all, whenever you talk about these things, as I say, there's a very large team of people that have had hold of it before we get anywhere near it. So it goes through a design stage, and then it goes through a practical sort of modeling stage, and then the animatronics get involved, and then it gets programmed, and all these people, this huge team of people, get these things ready to go, and then we come in and just kind of find its personality. So Dave and I, we played around with it for a while. We demonstrated it to J.J. Abrams, who really liked it, and us. So then we went off and read the script, and a lot of BB-8's personality is in the script. It comes from JJ's original idea, and Lawrence Kasdan and Michael Arndt, they kind of created this character. So then we go away, we look at the script, and we go, okay, what has he got to do? He's got to look sad at several times, got to be angry, he's got to run, he's got to do this. So we were given all the different versions of BB-8, and we saw which ones did what well, and which ones maybe didn't do certain things well, so we knew we wouldn't use those ones. And how could we make him look sad? How make him look happy? Could we make him go downstairs? Can we jump him? What happens if we hit things? So we went through, we found out all his kind of his strengths and weaknesses, and from there we just Dave and I just really kind of got our heads into it. And with the one version I used the most, there's 7 different versions of it in the movie, but the ones I concentrate on the most, really, there's a version that sits on a plate called the Wiggler, and his body can turn 359 degrees, and it also can rock, and the head does the same thing. So that's the kind of the version that you can get quite a lot of emotion out of, but it won't roll. There are also 2 trike versions which have got wheels on the back, and they digitally remove the wheels, and Dave will run the full head for that, and Matt Denton will drive that, and I'll be off camera doing lights, and I do dialogue for all of them. So when the actors will talk to BB-8, I will beep and boop and do the whole bit to give them something to work off of.
Does BB-8 have actual lines? Like, is there a line of what he's saying when Ray is like talking to him?
Sometimes we'll get that in notes, but for the most part, it's like BB-8 beeps excitedly, so I'll be going and doing that kind of stuff. But I just have to be sure to clip that off so that I don't go over any of the production dialogue. So that's the stuff they want to keep, and then they'll remove me, and then Matthew Wood and Skywalker Sound will come in and make it all lovely and just overdub me completely. But the other version is a rod puppet version, which if you've seen any of the making ofs, you'll see me running around in a blue or green suit, pushing him along, and I have the gross body movement on the body, so I'm pushing him forwards. He rolls forwards, but also I have an axle in that body, so if I move this rod, it goes forwards like this, but it also does this as well. So it's an optical illusion. It looks like it's spinning in all directions, but it's only ever going forwards. And I also have control over the head. So I can pitch the head forwards and backwards, and I can roll the head around the body. And then Dave Chapman, who I've been working with for a very, very long time, is a very good friend and extremely talented puppeteer. He has the yaw control, so he has left and right. So if you want to make BB-8 look up and to the left, I'll have to pitch the head back, roll it over, and then Dave will turn it. And he has a monitor, and he's way over the other side of the set. So he has a very precise job. He has to hit exactly where it's supposed to be. And sometimes I may not position it correctly, and Dave will have to kind of compensate for me. And we work together, and we share a sense of humor. So our timing is very similar. So Dave kind of knows when I'm going to go and how I'm going to do things. So we have a shorthand now, which we can just kind of really get on with it very, very quickly. So we had to get that performance together because we don't get a lot of rehearsal on set. Because when it comes to filming shooting a movie like this, it's time is money. So you have to kind of get in, hit it, and move on to the next thing. So we don't get many goes at it. So we get a couple. They're pretty good with us, but we don't tend to take that long.
And you said it's a pretty physical job because are you actually like running behind BB-8 at times?
Yeah, I'm pushing him around. I think he weighs about 25 pounds. And through the sand, that does get heavy because it's quite soft sand as well. So he'll dig in. But I remember when we were first developing it, Josh Lee had given me a mock-up version of BB-8, which is a full-size ball. It has this it was quite a new type of vinyl on the outside of the ball. And Josh asked me to run it around the back lot and see if I could dent it. Just run it into things to see what impact would have on it, if it could get scratched or scuffed, or if you could clean it easily. So I ran it around the back lot of Pinewood and suddenly realized that I was not in good shape. And so I went out and got a personal trainer 3 times a week for about 12 weeks just to kind of get my cardio up and my core strength. I knew I was going to be running in the heat, and it was very, very hot. So I had to really get into shape for that, and then sort of maintained that through Last Jedi and then into Rise of Skywalker.
The BB-8 exercise regimen.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's you suddenly realise you haven't done any for a while, and there's another movie coming back. So, oh no, I've got to get the running shoes back out. But it was a lot of fun to do, and it was a good motivation.
So you guys are running. You said you're filming a bunch of. You're always doing everything really quickly. What was the biggest mishap you guys had on set? Funny that happened.
We didn't have a lot of disasters, which was good. I did in The Last Jedi. There's a shot where Finn and Rose, they're looking for the guy, the contact that Maz has sent them to find in the casino, and BB-8 runs to the top of the stairs and stops. Except I didn't stop, so I'd slipped, and BB-8 went down sort of 2 stairs, and I went with him. So I kind of slipped on my backside and just kind of went with him a little bit, took a bit of a tumble, and everybody just ran in, obviously to save BB-8, not to save me. But that was I went down then. But we were pretty. It was pretty good actually. It was very well built. So he had some trouble with the heat early on. The electronics didn't like just how hot it was, and I know that Matt and Josh had trouble with the vinyl that was stuck to the outside because it got so hot the glue started to melt and they started to lift, so they had a lot of trouble with sand getting into him. and glue and sand are never good fun. So
Sand causes a lot of problems in the Star Wars world.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it does. It's coarse and it gets everywhere. Yeah. So yeah, we didn't have it. We didn't have a lot of problems with it, really. No. I suppose me falling over was probably the worst one I can remember. But again, there are so many of us involved in it. If you were to ask Matt or Josh or Dave that question, they would give you completely different answers because you can only ever tell it from a certain point of view.
So besides BB-8, you also do the porgs. I know you do a bunch of other creatures. What are the other things like besides just doing BB-8?
Well, through the Force Awakens, we did the steel pecking bird that Rey rides past on her speeder, the thing on just tapping away on that piece of scrap. We did that, Dave and I. We did loads of things in the Force Awakens, and I can't now remember any of them, which is useless. There was a lot of stuff in Maz's castle that we would just jump in and out of, because with these films, a lot of the time, if you're not busy, they just say, quick, jump on that because such and such is doing something else. So we did in Rogue One, I was the robot that sees the ship fly in right at the very beginning when Krennic arrives in the farm at the beginning to come for Galen Erso. There's a white robot that sees them flying. Again, that was myself and Dave and Matt and another guy called Patrick Comerford who works with us a lot. And we did a lot of stuff in Jeddah, various creature faces. Bor Gullet was another one that there were at least a dozen puppeteers or maybe more. I mean, I want to say about 20 puppeteers on Bor Gullet because he was a giant practical squid. And people were crammed inside it. There were people doing the eyes, moving tentacles around. ILM went in and augmented some of that with CG later, but he was an actual giant practical puppet. What else did we get involved with in The Last Jedi? We were the Thalassirans, so the sea cows, the porgs, of course, which were, again, an absolute joy to do, except for having to be harnessed on the side of cliffs on the Dingle Peninsula, looking straight down to a drop that would kill you if you went, and just puppeteering these little animals. Luckily, again, they have great safety crews who will make sure you're staked in and you've got great big harnesses to stop you falling off. The little croupier in Canto Bight who's moving all the chips around, that was Dave Chapman and Dave on animatronics, and did the voice, and I was underneath it making him walk along. The Fathiers, the big racehorse characters, that was again myself, Dave, and Chris Clark, and I was at the back of that because those things were full size. So when you see it come out of the stable, that was a practical shot, and we shot that 5 times, I think 5 or 6 times. But we only had one Fathier, so they would lock the camera off, and we'd move it into the next store, and then move it into the next store, and the next one. Yeah, and they and then ILM would go in, and they would just change some scarring or just change the colors. So I was on the head, so I was behind that. I had the head and the neck, and sort of the big gross body movements for it. And Dave and Chris were running the face and the ears. So I would try to give a different performance for each one. Make sure they were doing different things, so it didn't look like we just replicated them digitally. So there was those. I got to be in a couple of them as well. Dave and I and Matt and Josh and those guys, we all appeared as soldiers in the crate battle. So that was quite fun. Solo again, I worked on those dogs that Moloch has. They were a combination between real dogs in suits and some animatronics as well. I was in a creature suit for that as well. I was in a creature called Hiran Biring, which Pablo Hidalgo, who writes all of the visual dictionaries, he named it after me, which he does that quite often. So whoever is performing it gets a little bit of Star Wars fame. So that's just sort of continued. In The Last Jedi, that was not something. The Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker was mostly BB-8, but also there's a little shot when they go to the festival, where there's 2 little creatures, like little mice things with great big ears, very cute little things, and that's myself and Dave on top of a sand dune with a couple of really beautiful little animatronics, and other stuff you just kind of jump on and off, Mon Calamaris or aliens or Ponda Baba. I worked with Tom Wilton on that. I did the face for Ponda Baba in Rogue One. So many, and you forget until you go back and watch the movies and you go, oh, I did that, which is it's nice, but you don't kind of tend to remember it moment for moment while you're making it, because you just get the thing shot and then you move on to the next thing. And it's not until you get to look back on it with a little bit of distance, you go, oh, I was involved in lots of that. It was just great.
It sounds amazing. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to take some questions.
Okay.
So if you guys have any questions, please drop them in the comments and we'll be sure to ask Brian. And also, if you ask a question, our friends from Hallmark have some prizes. So there'll be 3 winners from people who asked some questions. So we'll be picking those at the end of the stream. So stay tuned. And I guess my final question for you would be, what has Star Wars meant to you in being a part of this Star Wars universe and as a fan, I guess in both cases?
Well, it meant so much to me as a kid. I remember getting a report card that went home when I was about 10 saying that Brian's obsession with Star Wars will lead him nowhere and he should concentrate on his academic studies. I probably should have done that. But to get involved, to have been involved with it even slightly would have just been an amazing thing. You know, to come in and maybe done a week or 2 weeks. But I was on The Force Awakens for 16 months. And you were really sort of an integral part of the team, and it was just such an amazing thing. I really enjoyed that Star Wars has come back for a new generation, and I just was very, very pleased that BB-8 was as well received as we'd hoped he would be, because you're never quite sure how the audience is going to react to something. Luckily, BB-8 was sort of pretty much universally embraced. So that it's been lovely to have been, you know, part of a team of people that have brought that to life, and to now see it. I knew how big it had got, oddly, when I did a film out in Mumbai in India a few years ago, and I was walking down one of the main retail streets, and there was BB-8 in a shop window in India, and it just struck me. You said, yeah, this has gone really global. And it's just something, it's a very strange thing to be a part of, but really, really good fun.
Just that universal love of Star Wars.
Yeah. And it means so much to people as well, because what's been lovely about going out and doing conventions is that for a time we were all just locked in Pinewood, because we went from one film to the next film to the next film. And so when I started to be able to go to conventions, I got to meet people who it had meant so much to. And then you can take that back to Pinewood and the people that are making the movies and just say, you know, what we're doing, people are, you know, responding generally really well to. And it's when you see little kids dressed as Kylo Ren and Rey, or Rose Tico or Finn, you just go, yeah, this is kind of who. I've got a photograph of myself dressed as Darth Vader at 8 years old, and then you see those kids around with their dads who are dressed as Luke, or, you know, each generation has had their own trilogy, and I think that's really, really cool.
It is really cool. Let's see what the fans have to say. What is our first question that we have? All right, Saki the Sock Puppet says,
hello.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to become a puppeteer and become good at puppeteering?
Well, the first thing is just do it as often as you can. You know, try and work with monitors. I mean, you have a monitor in the form of your phone on selfie mode. So for television puppetry, you can use that as your television screen. What's great now is that you can record, edit, do effects, you know, and then you can broadcast straight onto YouTube, which we could never do back in the day. We'd need a cine camera or one of those expensive video cassette camera things. And I think just to try, there's lots of online courses just to make puppets, if that's what you know, if that's the kind of thing that floats your boat. Make puppets and just get used to performance. So watch things often, and they're fantastic, but watch things that aren't just the Muppets. Go away and watch other forms of puppetry or other things that aren't just puppets, because when the Muppets were put together, they were put together by Jim Henson, and the people he were bringing in were from quite diverse backgrounds and different performance backgrounds. And a lot of the time your personality will come through those puppets. So work on your acting skills and you know, work on your singing and that kind of thing, if you want to do those kind of performances, and go and find other like-minded people, because, you know, there's lots of puppetry societies. And I know that the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta has a big database of people all over the world, and definitely all over the US as well. So you can go and be with puppeteers. You know, find puppeteers and just people who share the same passions that you do, and then you'll just start making things and just keep making stuff, and don't be afraid to fail. Just keep knocking stuff out, and eventually you'll find your crowd, and you'll just you'll get in there.
That's great advice. Do we have another question from the audience? D. Brad Gibson says, what puppeteers influenced you?
Okay, so as I said earlier, I was never really steeped in puppetry history coming into this, so I've kind of learned from some very, very talented people on the job. You go back and you look at the work, obviously the work of Jim Henson, Frank Oz. I mean, for me, Frank Oz's performance in The Empire Strikes Back is just stunning as Yoda. It's just a brilliant performance. Guys like Dave Goelz and Jerry Nelson, again, all Muppet performers. But I've been lucky to have worked with some people in the UK who've been, absolutely brilliant as well. I trained under a guy called Nigel Plaskett, who is a great vocal performer, and he'd been puppeteer on children's television when I kind of joined. And various other puppeteers like Phil Eason, who I mentioned earlier, who played Yaddle in The Force Awakens. Not Force Awakens, sorry, The Phantom Menace. He taught me a great deal. So those people, a lot of my colleagues have really influenced me, and Dave Chapman and Neil Sterenberg and a bunch of other guys that I've kind of watched. Donald Austin. These, again, a lot of these names puppet people might have heard of, but they're guys who have just been working for years and years and years, and have really inspired me. Or you just look at stuff and you go, "That's very clever what you're doing. How have you managed to do that?" Where just people people who aren't afraid to play and look silly doing things. You find sometimes when we work with Neil Scanlon, he'll kind of sometimes make you work the puppets in ways you feel are counterintuitive. But by doing that, sometimes you find out what that puppet does that you wouldn't have found if you hadn't done it in a way you hadn't thought about performing it, if that makes sense. So Neil has been quite a large influence on me in that respect. So yeah, a lot of my peers, I often watch the people I work with and just think, "Oh, you're really good. How did you do that?" And then you try and get those people to come and work with you because you know they are going to do a great job of it.
Sounds great. Do we have another question? Deborah Luker says, "Did you find you gave each Porg a different personality when you performed, or did you treat them all the same?"
I don't know really. We had it's a great one actually. We had two teams. We had two Porg teams. There was myself and Dave and two other guys called Damien and Colin. And occasionally we were joined by other people. And so I suppose Damo and Colin, they did their thing their way. We had a set way to do it. But I suppose there are different ways. There was the Chewy Porg, which is the one that roars on the one that was in the trailer. That was definitely, that one looked different as well. So we kind of gave they tried to give him a little bit more of an attitude, I suppose. But a lot of them, I think, because they were quite generic. So I don't think we really did give them a massively different personality, although the sad Porg, which is a little practical shot that took 5 of us to operate because even the lip was performed. So there was someone on the eyes and someone else on the wings, because each Porg they're about this big. And what people don't realize about them is they were all individually hand feathered. So each single feather was put in by hand, and there's a whole hair and feather department on the creature shop. And so there's the Porgs, again, a really nice marriage of digital effects from ILM and practical effects from the creature shop. So they will sometimes the digital guys will take over, or they'll augment the puppets just so that they can maybe the mouths can stretch more than you could do practically. They'll just come in and tweak, and of course they'll always remove the puppeteers from it. So the sad Porg, there were say 5 of us, and we had to do that. That was a particular type of Porg, and it was a very special puppet. Because it had a lot more mechanisms in it, and it didn't do some of the stuff that the other ones did, but it had a whole bunch of other mechanisms in it. And I remember it was just this giant close-up of this thing, so we had to get it right. And that was fun. That was a fun one to do. So yeah, that one definitely had a different personality.
That must be so difficult with like 5 people all crammed behind making this tiny thing.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of the guys on that they were outside because it was radio controlled, but the one particular puppet where you could apply that thing too is that Babu Frick in the most recent in The Rise of Skywalker, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 puppeteers directly behind Babu Frick, and then 4 was it 4 behind or 5? I think it changed, but there was definitely Matt and Shirley Henderson who did the voice, who was Moaning Myrtle in the Harry Potter film. She was doing the voice and the mouth live, so it's very rare that we get sort of the voice artists to come in and play the role from a puppetry perspective, but that JJ definitely wanted to come and do that. So she came and joined the team, and she was on the face with Matt Denton, and then we had a bunch of, say, Damien and a few of the other guys right behind Babu Frick, and they were all removed. There was no real estate back there at all, and they were crammed probably in about a foot, maybe 2.5 foot space between them and the back wall. So they had very little room to maneuver, and it was quite a complicated thing. But I think they did a fantastic job of it. But yeah, but they were definitely crammed in, just really concentrating.
It's truly movie magic to see all the.
Absolutely, yeah.
What is our next question? Kelly Keene says, what kind of education did you have to allow you to get into this field? Asking for my son who's watching too.
I have none whatsoever. Absolutely none whatsoever. And it's I don't advise that, but I left school very early. I didn't get a great education. It just wasn't for me. I knew I always wanted to go into the theatre, so at 18 I went straight out and started getting work. There are all kinds. There's no one way into this, and but there are also some fantastic courses, and you tend to find the people that you meet on those courses are the people you will continue to work with a lot of the time through your career. So I do know that there are, say, lots of puppetry courses you can go and do degrees, but again, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you a career. But you know, a good basis in theatre and a good grounding in that kind of thing is never a bad idea. But it is a very, very tough business. But you can also go and take courses, as I mentioned earlier, the Centre for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. They know of a lot of courses that you can take vocationally, which don't necessarily mean you just have to jump in and take a degree. But I didn't go the theatre school route. It is really something I fell into, but I've been very, very fortunate in the fact that through my career I've managed to make good contacts and work with some people who work at a very high standard, and then they've carried me with them, and then eventually you kind of find your own way. But it's very, very difficult, and also because of the age, I'm 50, so the age that I'm at now, the industry has changed to such an extent. There are now it's probably easier and more difficult to get involved. It's easier through as I was talking about mobile phones now, because you can make your own stuff and you can make it very, very quickly, and you can actually show things to people, and sometimes they'll go, oh, we really like that, that's great work, you should come and work with us. So you can actually present a show reel of stuff you've made. Whereas when I had to get a show reel, it was all stuff of things I'd actually got jobs from and had to take VHS cassettes or clips of the programs or the films, and you have to build that up over some time. But you can, with your phones and your cameras and all that kind of thing, you can actually just produce your own show reels. So if you can get those to the right people, then you never know your luck.
That's very true. Thanks, Kelly. Do we have another question? Rhiannon says, what other behind-the-scenes things you experienced on Star Wars sets that is something you love?
Some of the other things that we've experienced, we've seen some pretty cool stuff. I mean, a few of us were crammed into the living quarters of the Millennium Falcon when Han Solo and Chewbacca first arrived to say, Chewie, we're home. And that was quite the moment. Just to see those two on screen again was absolutely amazing. One of my other favorite moments was from The Force Awakens, where BB-8 finds R2-D2 and C-3PO enters, and they have a little conversation. And it was a lovely thing, because as a Star Wars fan of all those years, I felt like I'd been invited to join Laurel and Hardy. This BB-8, R2-D2 and C-3PO are obviously a classic double act, and to suddenly get to be able to play a scene with those characters was really very, very special for me. And yeah, we sort of stood. I've stood and watched some pretty cool stuff go on. I saw Kylo Ren stab his father, and we went, oh, and then we had to keep it quiet for 2 years. So it was to keep that one locked up. But we get to see some really, really lovely stuff. It's great.
It must be such an amazing experience.
Yeah, it is pinch me time a lot. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions. Let's see
Okay.
the next one. Kendall says, since you mentioned having a BB-8 go downstairs on accident, how many backup BB-8 units do you have? Was it pretty robust against denting in your tests?
Okay, yeah. Well, as I said, there are 7 different versions of BB-8, but only really one version of each. So we've been quite lucky that we've never had any major disasters. I think we did have a moment on the first one where they needed him to go very, very fast, and they hooked him to a stunt wire, and it went too fast, and it flipped, and that smashed the head. But luckily, we have spare heads, so they can just take the top off and put a new one on. We've never had the definitely the puppet version is extremely robust, so that doesn't, there's not vast amounts that can go wrong with that. Sometimes we have little glitches with it, but usually we have very clever people who just can come in and fix it pretty fast. We've never really damaged it to the extent we've set the production back. And if it has been damaged, we've kind of covered it up and just got on with it. And then we've broken it, fix it quick. So we've waited until we've got the shot, and then just sort of just pulled it to pieces and just get the soldering irons out. But on the whole, it's a very, very well made and very robust character. So yeah, we've been pretty lucky.
It's a durable little guy.
He is a very adorable little guy.
Do we have another question from the chat? Aman says, are there any creatures from the comics or video games you wish you can get to bring to life?
Oh, I'm still waiting for Jackson the giant green rabbit to come back in one of the films. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but it was one of my favorites when I used to read those comics years ago. What else did we think? What would I like to see? I'd quite like to see. I think they had these little thing called, I think they called Hoojibs towards the end of the Marvel run, which I quite liked. Which is like these lop-ear rabbit things with that was sort of it was psychic. They might be quite fun to do. I'm just trying to think what else has been in the canon that would have been fun to perform. I've had some quite fun stuff in Rebels, but I can't think of any of the names of the things at the moment, I'm afraid. But no, it's we've been lucky that the newer stuff they brought in anyway has just been such a hoot. But yeah, I suppose that the little Hoojibs from the comics might be quite fun to get involved. I'm trying to think of anything else that has been involved in those. There was I think there were things in the first sort of Timothy Zahn books, these kind of force bubble creatures that Grand Admiral Thrawn would wear around his neck to stop him being kind of mind probed. I thought they might be quite fun to do. Those little rod puppets there, that might be good.
That sounds good. I think we'll do one more question
Okay.
from the audience. Let's see what we got. Christian says, I find being a screenwriter, each character is part of my children in some way. Do you feel the same way about the puppets you are doing in films? Like it's hard to pick a favorite because just like
right. Well, with BB-8 was interesting because I did some tests with him, and I very much thought he was very much like a dog. And I had a dog that was hit by a car, and he had a plate in his back leg. So when we would ask him where his bad leg was, he would offer you his back leg to stroke because oh, where's your bad leg? And you give his leg a stroke. So with I took that idea, and when Ray initially finds BB-8, he's got a bent antenna, and he puts his head down, and we shot it a few times, and she would just take it out, and then she went to do it once, and I just pushed my head forward, and she took it out. And I put my head back, BB-8's head back, and I looked at it. And then she went to put it back in, and I pushed the head forward again, and she put it back. And that was that. And then we did it a couple more times. They didn't make the cut of the movie, but every time she meets BB-8, he puts his head forward, and she just checks his antenna. And so that kind of ran through The Force Awakens, but didn't make the final cut. But then when we did it at the end of The Last Jedi, which when they were on the Falcon, that's the first time that Ray and BB-8 had been reunited in that story. I said, oh, should we do the thing with the aerial? So you just see her check it, and she goes, oh, it looks great. And then when we came to them being reunited at the end of Rise of Skywalker, we just did it. So, I rolled in and put the head down, and she just checks it. And so that was kind of a thing that I suppose I based on interactions with my dog that we put in. And it was just a nice bonding moment and a character moment for something that is really an inanimate object. that builds a little bit of character into that. Trying to think if any of the other things. I mean, the Porgs were just a universal pain as far as the characters were concerned. So that we just tried to find ways for them to be as annoying as possible for the story. So we did a bunch of tests with the back ends of Porgs hanging out of control panels on the Falcon. In fact, I'm not sure if you can see it in the film, but there is in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, there's a big strip light that runs right the way along the side of above the pilot and the co-pilot, along the side of the cockpit. And we cut a hole in the back of that cockpit, and we had somebody with a big dark. It was actually a sweater because we couldn't get a puppet in there. But what we needed was a shadow moving around in there. So we just thinking, how would these things? If you let a bunch of mice out in here, where would they go? And what kind of damage would they cause? And so we just thought one of them's got inside the venting, and so you could see this shadow moving around in there. And that was, we were just sort of, I suppose we just based that on pets and animals and what would they do, because we do look at different types of animal and how they behave, and then we try and put some of that into those creatures to give them a believability within the story.
I love that. That's so great. Thank you so much for answering all our questions and for sharing so many amazing stories. I know I was going to say, I always noticed that part of BB-8 and Rey's relationship, that she's always checking on him. We just watched Rise of Skywalker, so that was great to mention that, because it's the kind of thing that we all notice as fans. So it's great.
I'm glad you picked it up. Yeah,
really thinking of these moments. So I really appreciate it.
It's been such a lovely experience to do that, and it's really lovely actually to hear you say, oh, we noticed that, because you wonder often how much people do pick up from it, because a lot of our stuff, the Creature Shop makes such wonderful stuff, and sometimes it just flashes past. It's almost walking wallpaper, but it's just those little characters sometimes that people notice in just half a second in the background that inspires them, as you see a cosplay of something that was hardly on screen. And that's really gratifying. And I know that all the guys in the workshop at Pinewood, when they see that, they go, somebody actually built my character. They love it. So that's very cool.
And those are always the best, those obscure cosplays. I always love seeing those.
Absolutely. It's I've had people cosplay me as well, which is very funny.
Yes, the green suit with the BB-8 is always really fun. I love seeing that.
Makes me laugh a lot. Yeah.
So I want to thank you again, and thank everybody for tuning in and for celebrating May the 4th and Revenge of the 5th with us. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you guys soon. Everyone stay safe and healthy.
Good luck, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.